tickles us pink because we're out here to share that this business education is appropriate for firms of all sizes, and the tools and things that you'll be exposed to are completely scalable to any size business or sometimes any size challenge in your business. So I'll go ahead and get started sharing my screen. And then my slides. Here we go. All right, I didn't lose you guys this time. All right, so if you are here for the AIA Business Academy information session, you are in the right place. Quick overview of what we'll discuss. I will briefly mention the business acumen landscape here at AIA and a little bit behind the strategy of how this program came about, and then even a little bit more around the types of business offerings that we have across the landscape, including AIAU and conferences and different levels of education that we're committed to offering. I'll go over the Business Academy and the benefits there, and then I will hand it over to Richard and Doug to dig a whole lot more into the content and the things that you'll be learning. So a little bit about me. My name is Rachel Gresham. I'm your Business Academy ambassador, and here to make sure that the participants get a white glove experience the entire way through the program, personalized emails and reminders and things that will come directly from me. And I am your first line of contact for all of our participants. I practiced architecture for 10 years, and I'm a licensed architect and managed about $80 million worth of public safety and K-12 work before I made the transition a couple of years ago to AIA. And then I also decided to go back to school right after I got my license and get my master's of business. So teaching architects business is really close to my heart, and I absolutely love my job here, which is injecting business acumen into the profession. So what does the greater business acumen landscape look like? We have 3 areas of focus. When we were looking at formulating a strategy on how to educate members on business, we looked at topics from the ARE, the Guides for Equitable Practice, the Framework for Design Excellence, and all of these we started to synthesize and digest and came up with 3 areas of focus that we want to target for business education. The first one is firm culture. The second is project management. And last but certainly not least is business prosperity, which I see is the glue that holds it all together. In the larger circles, we have 101 level content, so very discreetly content that falls into each one of these circles. In the overlaps of the circles, we start to see 201 content, and then in the center where all 3 circles overlap is where we'll talk about 301 level content. So here you can see we're scaffolding education at the bottom of this pyramid, which is not something I made up. It's a proven educational taxonomy to build education in this way. At the bottom, you have understanding and recall. We're offering business fundamentals courses on AIAU on business topics. This is all meant to be evergreen business topics that don't really change over time. Think how to read a balance sheet and your other financial statements, basics of accounting, setting budgets, basics of leadership, and marketing as well. At the 201 level, we have analyzing and applying concepts. We're really hoping to offer this type of content at conferences like AIA 25, WLS, and then in programs like Next to Lead. We're working closely with components to offer content at this level. Why this type of content is great in those spaces is because this is where social learning really works best, is at this 201 level and higher. And then at the 301 level, it's best for creating and evaluating content and concepts. And that's where the 301 Business Academy sits in these special programs or standalone programs. Who is engaging with this type of content? At the 101 level, we're targeting ARE candidates, emerging professionals, new founders, and entrepreneurs. At the 201 level, we're targeting firm owners, architects that are looking to level up in leadership at medium or large firms, project team leaders that are starting to run projects and need to know a little bit more about how the business operates. And then at the 301 level, we're targeting senior leaders, aspiring senior leaders, and entrepreneurs as well. So Heather, I'm thinking of folks at Perkins and Will that might be looking to take that next step, and what might they need for that executive level leadership? How can we equip them to be successful? There's important threads throughout all of this education that are really important to AIA. Entrepreneurial thinking is the first one. I'm sure that everyone on this call, if we had a nickel for every very creative way that we heard, this is the way that it's always been done, we would retire to Hawaii and be happy folks. So entrepreneurial thinking is super important to me and AIA to make sure that we're pushing these business concepts and how do we use them to create the practice of the future and not just rest on our laurels. The next is sustainability and EDI. Those of you who are very involved with AIA will know that these two tenets are extremely important to AIA as a whole and are items that we are continuing to push and value as we move forward. So those will all be embedded in the business content that we provide. There we go. So the Business Academy. This is the 301 level content that I was alluding to. If you scan this QR code, it'll take you to the landing page, or you can Google AIA Business Academy, and it's the first thing that will pop up. The Business Academy is focused on strategic management level content. I won't get too much into this because Richard and Doug will cover it, but strategic management tends to be a topic that is covered at the end of most reputable MBA programs. And it's taken last for very specific reasons. You have spent your degree sort of gathering these foundational concepts on accounting, finance, marketing, and business development. And now this is the place where you take all of those learnings and you analyze and wrestle with them together. And it really focuses on capturing and communicating value and formulating and implementing strategic plans. So a little bit more in depth, this is a blended program. It is 2 in-person sessions and 2 virtual sessions. And there's a timeline on the next slide. This is going to enhance the financial success of your clients and your folks and your firm through clear strategic direction. And then, like I said before, it's meant to provide an appropriate sampling of MBA content. Just to give you that kind of flavor. So if you've ever considered an MBA, this might be something you want to try first to make sure that it's right for you. And it's a lot less expensive. Here's the timeline. You're in an info session right now. June 4th is the in-person launch event at AIA 25 in Boston, Massachusetts. We've got a virtual session from noon to 2 on September 4th. On November 13th is another virtual session, again, noon to 2. And then in January of 2026, we have our wrap event and celebration in Washington, D.C. at the brand new headquarters. So this, if you participate in this program, you'll be one of the first people to share in the excitement of that new campus. A little bit more about the program. Again, I've mentioned developing a value proposition is a big part of this program. Relationships as differentiators is where the business development content comes in. Business model canvassing and strategic thinking frameworks. This is all about providing tools. If the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? So a big part of this program will be equipping students with lots of different tools that can be applied at many, many different scales, how to use them, and what's the right challenge to apply these specific tools. We'll talk about accountability and leadership. So once you've used a tool and you have a plan, how do you implement it and hold folks accountable? There's lots of data out there that just having a strategic plan isn't it. You've got to be successful in its implementation to see major results. So that's a topic we definitely want to cover. And then last but not least, diversification and vertical integration are all fancy words for succession planning. So that'll be a bit towards the end of the program. Who's it for? Hopefully lots of different people on this call. Really, the way I like to describe it best is anyone who influences strategic decision making or wants to be in a position to be a part of making strategic decisions. That can be owners of small firms, executives in large firms, or aspiring executives at large firms as well. Anybody with an ownership stake, and then anybody who really wants to get the foundational skills and knowledge to run a prosperous firm. Here's the list of benefits, which is available on the website. On the left-hand side of these two gray and blue columns, you'll see the basic program. That includes all the 4 sessions that I described, learning from our top professors that are here on the call, cohort learning and collaboration, which I'll get into a little bit later, the comprehensive strategic planning tools I talked about, an online network. What we're wanting to do is create a network for participants and then grow that network year over year. So a place for folks to collaborate on their work in the program and then continue to make connections outside of class and with future cohorts. Everyone will get a copy of The Art of the Start by Guy Kawasaki. It'll be used in your learning. And then this is where the Program Plus benefits start. So that's the end of the basic program. The Program Plus benefits also include a ticket to conference, which is a full pass. That's $859. Then a 1-hour private consultation with our professors on the line. And then you'll also get access to 3 additional AIAU Business Fundamentals courses with the Program Plus package. A little bit more about our interactive community and network. If anybody is part of a KC on the call, you'll be familiar with our community hub, where our knowledge communities and some other communities at the national level have a collaboration space. So we'll have a collaboration space for this group where you can upload your assignments, you can ask our professors and each other questions, you can network, get to know each other. And again, year over year, we'll be adding participants to this. We'll never remove anyone unless there's an admin issue, but this is meant to be a collective and a growing community of folks that have gone through this program nationwide. On the right-hand side, you'll see a little snippet from the AIAU platform. So after purchasing the program, you'll get access to the platform that you see on the right-hand side. And it's got all of the sessions outlined. It will have all of your assignments that you need to complete for your CEU credits there as well. And you can track your progress through the course. There is grant funding available for firms that are 10 employees or fewer. I have lots of people that have applied for this grant. The deadline is on April 23rd. And this is $1,100 to offset your purchase of either program. And the requirements are being an AIA member, having 10 or more years of experience, owning or operating a firm of 10 employees or fewer, again, having a major influence on the strategic decisions that are made at your firm, and then being able to demonstrate that your employer or business will be covering less than 50% of your tuition. There is an exception for sole proprietors. So make sure when you're filling out the application that you let us know that you are a sole proprietor, and option number 5 does not apply. Number 6, we would like folks that have exhibited an interest in volunteering at AIA. So want to make sure that folks that apply have demonstrated their commitment to the organization through volunteer leadership, and then having a history of seeking out professional development. We also have a What's in It for Me toolkit. So everyone that has attended today, you'll get a follow-up email from me with this toolkit attached. And this is in a case that you might need to make a case to your employer for your attendance. You can see that it includes information about the program, and then it also has a few additional resources, including steps to make the case for your employer, steps 1 through 5, and then an example proposal letter if you need to make a formal ask. There's a little bit of prerequisite experience required. As I have explained, this is 301 level content. So we're looking for folks that know a little bit about the business so far at this 301 level. So a little bit of familiarity with how organizational structures work, some knowledge on finance and financial statements, which you can also get on AIAU if you don't have that. competitive knowledge of competitive markets that your firm faces, an interest in big picture thinking and analyzing case studies, which I'll let Richard and Doug talk a little bit more about. And then, of course, an open mindset for strategic innovation and adaptability. Here is a peek at some prerequisite recommendations that are on AIU right now. You can go find them today. Building and scaling a successful design practice, and then business of architecture, finance, and risk management for architects. And these are all available today. Okay, this is all great, but why? By going through this program, our hope is that you can grow the effectiveness of your business. You can sort of quiet down all of that noise that might be distracting you from running a small business, or if you're part of a large firm, really be able to focus on the skills and skill sets that you need to help run the business effectively and make great decisions. This type of content is important for the long-term survival of a firm. And then, of course, we're expecting major prosperity impact when it comes to attending this program. So with that, I will introduce our two esteemed professors, Doug Bossy and Richard Coughlin. They are both professors at the University of Richmond, and between the two of them, they have over 40 years of experience educating on this content. And specifically, they have experience teaching this content to professional services providers. So not only are they wonderful business professors at an MBA program, but they can speak our language. They understand that sometimes concepts that are taught in the context of widget making aren't always applicable directly to professional services, but they'll be there the whole way to help the class take these basic tools and skills and make sure that they're applicable to professional services industry, like architecture. You can reach out to me at any time with clarifications. This is my email address. You'll also receive an email from me to follow up on that. But with that, I will check the chat for questions that I can answer via text, and then I will hand it over to Richard and Doug.
Rachel, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on with you, and we really appreciate the partnership. Doug and I have thoroughly enjoyed collaborating with you to develop this, and I'm grateful to Corey for introducing us to AIA. Several months ago, I had the great opportunity to present at AIA 24 a session on designing a blueprint for a more profitable firm, and the reaction from that was really positive. And the invitation from Rachel to collaborate on this business academy is something that really warms our heart. So Doug and I are looking forward to presenting a little bit of material to you here about the 4 sessions that Rachel mentioned not so long ago. I want to start with a little bit about what's going to happen, what our approach was in guiding the development of this program. As Rachel said, both Doug and I have had considerable experience working with professional services firms, presenting in rooms like this where there are a variety of firms of a variety of sizes and people at slightly different roles. What we wanted to focus in on was this question about where do you want your firm to be by the end of 26, and then work backwards from there. Both Doug and I had corporate careers prior to entering academia, so we have some sense of the kinds of things that you're thinking about. And what we wanted to do was identify the future state and then think about how will we get there. 2 ways to answer that question in our mind. One is through what strategic steps, and the second is what's the culture that's likely to help you get to that spot. And our view is this should be an aligned and focused process. One of the reasons that Doug and I have so much fun collaborating over the last couple of decades in a variety of programs is because we share this outlook that this process should be aligned and focused. So when we gather, I guess it's only 7 weeks from now in Boston, we will work from that idea of building a strategic blueprint. I'm going to turn this over to Doug in just a moment to walk through all of this. He and I will both present in Boston, and we'll do the same in Washington in person in early 2026. We'll both also be on the calls, the virtual calls, and there's more details to come on that. Doug, you want to introduce yourself and then spend a little bit of time talking about this first session in June in Boston?
Sure. Thank you, Richard. As Rachel said, the target here is for people who are either currently engaged in the strategy conversation at their firms, or they aspire to be engaged in that conversation. And Rachel also used the term social learning as something that characterizes the 201 and 301 levels. And I just want to share that strategic thinking and strategic frameworks really start to make a big difference when you've got someone to bounce your ideas around with. And so we are expecting that this first cohort does in fact start to behave like a cohort. So of the all four sessions that we've designed, there's a lot of group interaction. There will be times when Richard and I are posing questions to you as individuals or in pairs or in small groups and sharing with you a framework or a tool of some kind. And then we're going to immediately turn it over to you and say, now try to use it and try to apply it either to a firm that we've selected, like a case, or try to apply it to your own firms so that you get practice with it. And then you also immediately have someone to bounce your thoughts around with, the others at your table and the others in the room. So that social component, I just want to stress, is super important. To me, a related insight is that when you look across all of the architecture firms in the industry, you'll see that there is tremendous variance in the performance of these firms. Some of them are performing at an extraordinarily high level, and some are not, and some are in the middle. The more muscle you develop in strategic thinking, we believe the more likely you are to skew your firm towards the higher end of that performance range, and that's what we're after. That's one of the things that we're here for. So one of the things that differentiates these firms is their value proposition. Some of them have sort of scoped out a very specific differentiated position, and their clients and prospective clients see them as a differentiated service provider and are willing to pay for that differentiated service. So our hope is to nudge you in that direction, most likely, to identify what would be a more highly valued value proposition for your own firm. And even if we're not sure, and you're not sure, we're at least going to give you a chance to test some of your thoughts. We'll talk about various analytical frameworks to make sure that we understand and that you understand what really is the current situation that you're facing. Because all strategy is going to be contextually situated. And so it can be surprisingly hard to get really, really clear and to get consensus with your other colleagues on what is the situation. So the SWOT analysis, the PESTEL analysis, five forces analysis, these are all things that we use in the MBA classroom quite regularly, and they're foundational building blocks to a strategy conversation. And then something about stakeholder engagement I'll share is that there is a point of view consistent with entrepreneurial thinking, consistent with sustainability, consistent with EDI, as Rachel mentioned, that stakeholders matter. When we do strategic thinking, we have to realize that any business model involves contributions from a wide range of different types of stakeholders, and they all have alternatives to working with us or to working with our firms. And so we need to think about them, each of them, and the value proposition that we can satisfy for them that keeps them engaged. Richard?
Thank you, Doug. I'll pick up the final bullet point here. We could have labeled this marketing or selling or business development, but those terms are a little bit too broad for what we're trying to help you do. What we'd like to be able to do is help you build muscle around storytelling. What's that one project that you had 2 years ago that would really stand out if you described it in appropriate and vivid ways for the next potential client? They're going to grasp onto that. We also know that some of our potential buyers, some of our potential clients are focused on data. They want us to prove our worth, if you will. What are the key pieces of data? How might we organize and then present them without overwhelming the other side? So these two things go hand in hand. Some of our stories will involve data, some won't. But what we want to be able to do is help you improve your business development activities by working very closely on storytelling and data so that you can communicate your firm's unique value. Perhaps we'll pause here. This is the end of our presentation on the first session that we'll cover in Boston. And before we get to the virtual sessions, let me pause and see if there are any comments or questions on what we'll cover together in Boston. And if not, we'll move into the virtual session. The first of those happens on September 4th. So imagine now that we're 90 days from the session that we had in Boston. You're going to get a few things from us in the interim. The way that we've designed this is that there are going to be a few prompts that will have you thinking about some of this material before we get together online in September. This one is really about high performing and strategic teams. Now, that team might be just a few people on a project, or it might be broader teams across the organization. But here's where, this one could really be called leadership. We're going to talk to you about how you might grow the talent that already exists in the organization. We're going to have you look a little bit at how you're spending your time today and how that time might be spent more wisely. And one of the paths to that is really learning the art of delegation. And hand in hand with that is this idea of around accountability. Now, we adopt a slightly different approach to accountability. Audiences, I think, are generally surprised by the way that we tackle this. I'll preview it for you a little bit. This is not accountability that's heavy on monitoring and measuring things. It's really about working on mindset about those that work around us. How might we get them to feel accountable for this or for that? And what are some of the expectation setting things, and then goal setting things, and then follow up that are going to help us with that without having to burden them with monitoring and measuring and follow up. We'll get to that later. It's an important piece of it, but we always start with working on mindset. And then we'll examine how the firm culture impacts productivity. For better or for worse, how might we shape our culture? So, for instance, when we dial up accountability in the right sort of way, we ought to see higher levels of productivity. And that higher level of productivity ought to have a bunch of spillover effects, including positive client relationships, where now our clients are serving as ambassadors for us. They're actually helping us sell. And so here we're going to focus a lot on core values in the organization, which for us are real life decision-making tools, not just something that sits inside the organization. So looking hard at culture and the ties to productivities. I'll turn it to Doug for a discussion around case studies and then strategic goals and decision-making. Doug?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah. So one of the things that Rachel asked us to consider seriously was, how do we make this experience a lot like a premier MBA, Masters of Business Administration program experience, even though we're only meeting 4 times? And one of the things we talked about was the high value that we get in the MBA programs from using case studies. So we will be putting you all, the participants, into teams, and you will work in your teams in between sessions, not extensively, but enough to prepare some strong points of view before you come into the next group session, even the virtual sessions, so that in the virtual sessions we can actively start teasing apart, well, what did your team come up with and why? And how does that contrast with what the other team came up with and why? A case study is really just it's a rich story about a particular firm or organization at a particular inflection point where some key strategy decisions have to be made. We haven't finalized the case yet that we're going to use for this session, but our intent is to find a firm that is adjacent to architecture firms, close enough so that there can be insights that are generalizable from the case discussion and the case experience that you could generalize and map onto your own firms. At the same time, we don't want to use one of your firms as the case study because it's too close to home and it's too familiar. And we're going to be using your firms as the cases, basically, in some of the other days that we're together. I think that's what I have to say about the case for the purpose of this virtual session. Again, the virtual sessions are about 2 hours long, so we're going to have to work fast to fit all of this in, but I'm confident that we'll be able to get through that. Richard?
Thank you, Doug. And I should note that I hope it's coming through loud and clear. Both the in-person session and the virtual session would not involve lectures that Doug and I are going to deliver. Rather, it really is facilitating conversation. We've got the content. What we want to do is provide you with opportunities to talk about it with us and with your fellow cohort members. So that's really the approach that we adopt. This final bullet point, the virtual call, will tie the case to your firm and really have you think about what are the strategic goals that you're trying to accomplish, and then how might we break that down into day-to-day decision making. So much of strategy really comes alive through the day-to-day decision making of individuals across the firm. If it's a 1 or 2 or 3 person firm, I think that's probably a bit more evident. However, the coaching that Doug and I have done of professional services firms over the last 20 years suggests sometimes they're not taking full account of how some decisions that they make pull the firm away from strategy. Saying yes to a project because, well, it felt right to say yes to this. And then at the end of the year, we think, well, we didn't achieve all of our goals, right? Because you said yes to this project without fully thinking through the impacts of what it would mean in terms of things that you couldn't do. So staying aligned, if you will, is really the fourth bullet point here in the second session, the virtual session. The third virtual session happens on November 13th, and this one is focused on strategy and innovation. I'm going to let Doug talk about a couple of these, and then I'll come back toward the bottom of this. Doug?
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that will help tee up this session is the book that Rachel mentioned, The Art of the Start, and this is The Art of Start 2.0, written by Guy Kawasaki. He's a very, very good writer, and I promise that this book is short enough and direct enough that you won't feel like he's wasting your time. It is a really neat book, really about entrepreneurship, but also about how do entrepreneurs build value propositions and then communicate the value proposition differently to the different specific stakeholders that they're working with. And so the intent is to say, how do we do this in a way that is different and valued? So we'll talk through the ways that you pitch your firm to various stakeholders and different groups, and it gives us a chance to explore together what is it that wins a stakeholder. Think about a new client. What is it that wins a new client for your firm? One way or another, we think that in many cases, it's because they just want to work with you. In other words, your technical capabilities maybe got you the meeting, but it's not your technical capabilities that wins you the work. It's because they realize that in the length of this project, the way that your culture is, the way that your team works, the way that your value proposition is aligned with those makes a big difference in what it would be like to spend all of this time working with you, how persuadable you can be, but also how strong your backbone will be if they ask you to do something that's not appropriate. Richard?
Thanks, Doug. And then we'll talk about customer segments and key partnerships here. Again, thinking about the sphere in which you operate and how key relationships can play a role there, and then putting you into a position to differentiate yourself. The final bullet point here is our nod toward the world of finance. It's not a finance 501 course. It's really thinking about how might we justify certain investments that we're making. Is there some kind of new line of business or new geography that we want to explore? Well, there's going to be costs involved in that. What are the expected returns? And then how might we translate that into implementation? Both Doug and I coach consulting students here at the University of Richmond, and we're constantly encouraging them, or requiring them, if you will, to justify some of the recommendations. What are the costs? What are the investments that you're recommending? And then what's the expected return? We'd like to have you apply the same kind of thinking to your firm here. And so we'll look at business drivers, if you will, when we look backwards over the last 1, 2, or 3 years. What are some of the key investments you made in people, in technology, in certain, perhaps investing in certain new geographies, and how did they pay off? So that's one of the things that we want to focus on toward the end of that virtual session in November. And then, as Rachel said, we'll all get back together in January. We got a question the first time we did this information session about why is it so spread out from June to January? Why not just mush this into a couple of days? But we really believe that, that there's great value in reflecting and deliberating and anticipating what's coming. And of course, your firm's not going to be static from June of 25 to January of 26. That's really something that we're looking forward to, is how are you applying some of what you learned in June? And anyway, we'll pick up on that. Here, we're going to get back to the topic of accountability and really start to think about, knowing that January 29 of 2026 is the end of the program, but it's really the start of the next phase in your journey. How might we foster accountability going forward? What are some of the leadership behaviors that you're going to want to make sure you have in place and the others around you have in place? I'll let Doug talk about the business model canvas and a little bit about diversification and vertical integration, and then we'll come back and talk about the growth plan. Doug?
Thanks. Yeah, one of the ways that this fourth session is sort of anchored in my mind is that this really is the launching for the next chapter for you, as Richard alluded to. Look, strategic thinking can be a very unstructured process. It seems almost unfair how many moving parts there might be that have to be considered when you're designing a strategy for your firm. So what we've done is we're going to give you a framework or a template, and we're going to ask you to work through the whole thing on behalf of your own firm and develop your own strategy. Some of you already have a strategy, and so you may just need to communicate it in this format that we give you. Many of you, I'm quite confident, are going to be stretched. When we show this to you, you're going to say, uh-oh, that's going to take some careful consideration. And our intent is to give that to you before you show up in January at this session, but we're going to spend the full day together, and a good portion of that day, we're going to be talking about what do you have in mind for your firm's future, and exactly how do we tie down what's going on in this situation, what is the very biggest problem or opportunity that you can pursue right now, what is the specific set of decision criteria that your stakeholders need to know you're going to address with the future strategy. What is your recommended strategy? What are the financial implications? What are the implementation steps? What are the metrics that you would suggest get measured along the way? So all of these things are going to be rolled together and integrated into the conversations that we have at this January session in 2026. And some of you may end that day with more questions than you came in with, but that's okay. That's part of the process. And as Rachel mentioned, depending on the program you sign up for, there will be a chance to interact with us afterwards. And you will, of course, have your cohort mates. Long after this January session, you'll have them to lean on and say, hey, can I ping you, for a little bit of friendly guidance or friendly coaching afterwards? And they're going to be available to you. That's our aspiration. On the topic of diversification and vertical integration, this marries very well with a lot of the earlier topics we've talked about. A firm might say, we want to diversify in terms of geography. We want to cover more cities. We want to cover more counties, more states. They may diversify in terms of the service offerings that they have. We want a new practice area. We want to get more into sustainability, for example, than we have in the past. And that's going to require some active development of practice areas and methodologies and marketing and all of these sorts of things. And vertical integration, in this context means things like, what is the relationship that you have with construction engineers? What is the relationship you have with construction companies or building materials suppliers? Do you want partnerships in that setting or not? Do you want contracts in that setting? Do you want actually to join forces in a more formalized way? Those would be some vertical integration type of questions that we'll ask at this point. And it's really about, how do I understand the umbrella or the network, value network that we're a part of, and what role we want to play moving forward in that role. Richard?
I'll wrap up this session really by pointing you toward the key performance indicators that are mentioned in the final bullet point. Those are for you to decide. What Doug and I want to do is make sure that they're truly aligned with the answer you had to the question way back in June, which is where do you want your firm to be by the end of 2026? You get to choose those KPIs. What he and I would like to do is just make sure that there's some wisdom in the choices that you make there. You might say, well, key performance indicator is that we're hiring the best and brightest, this year, and we want to make sure that there's a piece there where you can measure that. Some firms are going to be focused on top line growth. Some would be focused on bottom line growth. Some would be focused on, expansion of service. So we really just want to make sure that that's aligned with conversations that we might have had 6, 7, or 8 months before that. And so I'll throw it back to Rachel at this point. Of course, Doug and I are staying on the call to see if you have any questions.
Thank you guys both so much. Every time we get to talk about this, I get more and more excited. So at this point, we have